Number 2, Georgia is at number 16, Ole Miss. Georgia right now about a 2.5-point favorite. The total is 54.5. This game's 3:30 Eastern time on ABC. This is an elimination game for Ole Miss. They've lost the opportunity to have do-overs by losing to Kentucky in just a shocking game at home, especially looking at where Kentucky's gone since, and then losing to LSU a couple weeks ago, a game in which they had the lead in the fourth quarter and really never trailed in the game, not for one moment until the final play in overtime. Either way, in the event in which Ole Miss loses, their playoff chances dip to under 1%, according to the All-State playoff predictor. So as much as you want to rip on the All-State playoff predictor or not, I think they got this one entirely right. Ole Miss loses, they're out, unless absolute chaos occurs just about everywhere else. The Rebels have one win all time against an AP top 2 football team. That was in 2015 against number 2 Alabama. Question number 1. Will Trey Harris be available for Ole Miss, and does it matter? Now, it says an awful lot about your receiving core and the depth of your receiving core when you are without arguably the best wide receiver in the country, or at least the most productive wide receiver in the country, and your offense doesn't suffer massively in the absence of that receiver. Now, Trey Harris is a big, physically imposing specimen out on the outside. He's an amazing player, and I don't think anybody was as impactful in the first 7 games of the season as Trey Harris. Look at the numbers. They reflect that. He's been sidelined for the last 2 weeks, and the numbers are not outrageous because he's still like 3rd or 4th in the country as far as receiving yards and missed multiple games. So looking at what he does is pretty amazing. The thing I think is fascinating about it, there's a guy that averages 141 yards a game. That's the most in college football. But I do think that sometimes when you have a bona fide alpha dog at wide receiver, the quarterback, Jackson Dart, I think sometimes, and I've been in this situation, like I played with Julio Jones, and sometimes when bells and whistles were going off, my eyes would just naturally look in the direction of Julio Jones. Now, if Julio Jones was for whatever reason not on the field, I went through my progression, and I didn't try to force feed my alpha dog. And I get the sense sometimes, especially with the target distribution in the first 6-7 games of the year, they almost always were looking in the direction of Trey Harris. Like when it was close, it was Trey Harris all the time. Well, now the whole world's opened up, and I think they will benefit from his absence long term. We've seen the emergence of Jordan Watkins, one of the most underrated players in the SEC, and I think people kind of forgot what he was capable of until last week. Goes for 5 touchdowns. Caden Lee in the slot's amazing. Juice Wells is still there, even though he hasn't been what we thought he might be coming into the season. I think they have 2 guys at tight end that can be really impactful as well. So having a great receiver is a blessing and a curse. So if Harris is there, great. If he's not there, we've already proven that we can overcome his absence collectively as a wide receiver room. Question number 2, can Ole Miss's defensive line impact Carson Beck? Now, Beck has to understand that this is a defensive front that is outstanding. They lead the country in sacks. They're among the highest in the country as far as pressure rate. They're among the highest in the country as far as pressures created. And when you look at Carson Beck and you look at his numbers, let's just look last week against Florida, right? Because this is coming out of a bye week. Carson now has had a chance to kind of evaluate where he's at, evaluate what he needs to do to improve his processing. And first opportunity out the gate against Florida, he's pressured on 11 dropbacks. He goes 2 for 11 for 29 yards and throws 3 picks. When he was not pressured against Florida, he was 23 of 29 for 280, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. So his QBR last week, when not pressured, 94. Remember, this is a scale from 0 to 100. Pretty good, right? 94 out of 100, we'll take that. In math class, that's a lock. But when he was pressured, his QBR dropped to 0.0. That's like the GPA in Animal House. Not what you're looking for. So, doesn't happen often. He doesn't get pressured a lot, but when he does, his numbers drop drastically. And I think a lot of people want to talk about the interceptions, and that's understandable, but the occasional lack of poise is what's really concerning from a guy that's in his 5th year of college football. Question number 3, will Georgia be able to run the football? Last year, Georgia ran for 300 yards against Ole Miss on 35 attempts. That's 8.6 yards per carry. That was last year's version of Georgia. It was also last year's version of Ole Miss. Now, this year's version of Georgia, 97th in rushing yards a game, and Ole Miss is 2nd in rush defense. So, two teams that have kind of gone in different directions. Georgia not nearly as committed to the run, partly because their offensive line has had some guys out of the lineup, and an Ole Miss defense that at times had given up a lot of chunk yardage on the ground in recent years, but they've really committed to that by really improving their personnel in the front seven defensively. Now, I also look at where the Rebels are as far as yards per carry. They're among the best, 2.3 yards per carry. So expect a heavy dose of ETN in the event in which ETN is back at 100% off the rib injury last week, assuming he will be. Heavy dose of him, heavy dose of Frazier, who appears to be getting back in the good graces of the coaching staff. And I think there's going to be the occasional run by Carson Beck, who has a tendency and a knack for having 3 to 4 runs a game that extend drives. Question number 4, will Jackson Dart be able to take the top off the defense? As far as explosive plays this year, Ole Miss is one of the best. Now, part of these numbers, remember, they were inflated by a really manageable non-conference schedule. But Ole Miss, as far as 10-yard runs and 20-yard passes, 111 explosive plays. It's the second most in the country behind Miami. Georgia, on the other hand, defensively, they've given up just 43 explosive plays. That's the 6th fewest in the FBS. Now, one other thing that Georgia's amazing at, and I love how their defense tackles. They've always been really good in that area, but it does feel like this year they're even better than they've been. They've given up just 584 yards after the catch this year. That's the 4th lowest allowed in the FBS. So if you're going to hit Georgia through the air, it's probably not going to be on catch and runs. It's probably not going to be on screens. It's probably going to be down the field because they don't allow many yards after catch because the coverage is tight and they do a great job of getting your ball carriers on the ground. And question number 5, will penalties be Ole Miss's Achilles heel yet again? The story has been pretty much the same for Ole Miss all season long. 77 penalties, that's 131st. 28 have come on defense. 27 of those 28 penalties have resulted in first downs for the opposition. That's the most in the Power Four. That's 131st overall in college football. So to give the opposing offense 27 first downs is of huge concern. And it led to them losing the game against Kentucky. And it is factored in at multiple other times when the defense just seemingly had bad technique. Hopefully they can get things righted this week, but it will be tough because I love what Georgia has on offense at wide receiver. I still think it's an underrated group, and I still think Carson Beck's best game is in there at some point. He's just got to start seeing the field a little bit better. A couple trends here. I look at this game, and this feels like the one that's been circled for Ole Miss for quite a while. Lane Kiffin went out in the offseason, signed a bunch of people in the portal, and said, you know what? We want to be like Georgia. We want to look like Georgia. We need personnel that could play at Georgia. They have long struggled to get those people. They have them now. Will they now step up and actually play well in a big game with so much on the line? Because they have not done that very much in their history. Against the likes of Bama, against the likes of Georgia, they've struggled. And in games like this, it has not been friendly for Ole Miss in the Lane Kiffin era. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath on ABC at 3:30. So come check it out.